Folks, welcome inside the Parisi Palace, high above 3773 East Broadway. This is a live edition of the Jake Feinberg Show, comedy on Power Talk. Please go to our website, powertalk.live. Download our free app to your smartphones. You can stream all of our live local programming, including Solomon on Blast, the Jim Parisi Show, and yours truly, the Jake Feinberg Show. Can't thank you enough for making us part of your day today. And as I continue on my journey to drop from my head to my heart into what I consider the primordial gut or the soul, I do this through interconnection with people that maybe I've never actually physically met before, but the frequencies that they are giving off clearly connect with me in a sonic nature, and as a result, bring them to me on my program so that inevitably their words, their stories, and their vibe will ultimately inspire regular people to be themselves and to lead with their heart. And this may happen well after we've left this planet, but I know that my guest recognizes that her work will live on long after she is gone. Yashoda, Devi, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's an honor to have you. Can you talk about how long it took you to cultivate dropping from your head to your heart to your primordial gut or your soul in your yogic practice?
Obviously, I think this is a life journey. So even when I wasn't in my practice, it was leading me to all the right places. But the practice that I have been in, it's been a journey of the last 16 years of my life. It probably took, if I were to really look back at the journey, the first 4 to 5 years within my practice and staying consistent to my meditation and everything else that I brought into my practice, probably took me about 5 years to really release the stress from my psychophysiology and really start to connect on a regular basis my heart space and starting to navigate fully from my intuition and not my stress, not my logic. And ever since then, it's an unfolding. It never ends, the expansion of it. It's quite a profound journey to go into more of the subtle aspects of it.
Can you talk a little bit more? I've never heard anybody use the term psychophysiology. What does that mean? And ultimately, after 5 years, how did you know that you were dropping into the soul space? I mean, was it a feeling? Was it a multi-sensory feeling? How did you know you had turned some kind of corner?
Well, it really comes from the training and the practice that I've received from both the knowledge and the technique itself. So practice, all of everything that I do are techniques that come from India, which is ancient knowledge. It's the source of where meditation came from. And from the perspective of working with the practice, what is taught and what is embodied, the experience, is really that we've got this biology of this body, which I'm referring to as our psychophysiology. We have our mind. It's a fancy way of saying mind-body. Right? We have this mind-body connection. And prior to really awakening in life, or for most of us, we don't just have an awakening that spontaneously happens. There's very few that happens to. Someone like Eckhart Tolle or somebody like Moji or certain masters, that's happened to. But the rest of us, really, we have to work at it. And a lot of what I'm talking about when I say the psychophysiology is we have the biology of the body, and it accumulates stress. And the stress within the body usually inhibits us from getting to our heart space, from connecting to our spirit. We can talk about it maybe on an intellectual level, but it becomes really abstract if we're not doing a practice that allows for us to move beyond our thinking and get into the space that most masters would talk about, which is the gap, the zone. And we all can get there. We can get there when we're hiking or we're riding a bike or we're singing or we're dancing. Some people might say golfing is like my meditation. And there's moments that we have that we get into a space of just being in our spirit. But the minute that we finish that activity, we're back into our stress mind. And our stress is connected to, or every thought that we have is connected to chemistry within the body that then has a reaction. So really through the practice, between sitting with my guru for years and years and years and traveling with him for almost a decade, and doing the technique, it finally came into a place where my nervous system had reset itself and I wasn't experiencing on a daily basis fight or flight. I wasn't in a reactive place all the time. Now, that doesn't mean that I wasn't experiencing reaction here and there. It was just fewer and far between. My brain, from sitting in meditation, when we do the yogic practices, they're designed to activate the brain to perceive on a more subtle level. And so from years of practice, sitting twice a day, every day, and hardly missing, and doing other added things, my brain was able to begin to perceive on a more subtle level. So there was a point that I hit about year 5 where literally from my training, I wasn't having very much thought within my mind with my eyes open. There actually was a phase where I had no thinking, which was incredibly uncomfortable and not normal phase to go through. And once that established, it was as if my hard drive got wiped out. And what I had known to be true, which was a lot of stress reaction and depression and suicidal thinking and sadness from, circumstances in my life, that really got wiped away. And there was very faint memories of that. And what I had imprinted was, this body of silence and stillness, which equates to bliss. And that's the moment where there was a huge turning point. That silence that felt like it was very uncomfortable, that happened day after day after day for weeks. What happened was that then the thoughts that started coming through after that were really relevant thoughts. Because my mind had gotten so calm, whatever came into my mind, I went into action with. So if I had a thought, maybe there was some conflict or some friction within my mind, instead of letting that build and me suppress it and ignore it, I would address it if I had the thought more than twice. And I would move towards resolution very quickly. And then the thoughts that would come through would be creative, or they would be, again, calm and silence. And in that is where this restructuring and this rebuilding started to happen. More creativity started coming through, more in it was a subtle change, but it wasn't subtle, it was massive. And that was a big turning point.
I think this is, that was incredibly articulate. I just want to ask you, it says here, the Vedic meditation and co-creative space. This is Yashoda Devi Ma's place of peace and subtle mind. But it says a sacred place to activate and awaken both the subtle mind and the body. And Yashoda Ma, in my journeys over the last 9 years as a rogue journalist, I've learned to access my multidimensional self, and in essence let the body dance, especially to rhythm, music, and also just in life. And so I've talked to a lot of percussionists who were steeped in all sorts of traditional African drums and Afro-Cuban rhythms, and they were very prolific professional players, and they always talk about rhythm of the drum is aligning the mind, the body, and the spirit. And so I wonder why spirit is not in the sacred space, the Vedic meditation sacred space. Why is it just mind and body? Because the way I look at it is, on a macro level today, in this culture, or one big civilization that we live in, the body of the car is very sleek, but there really is no soul. Inside the car, there's no soul. There's no spirit. The spirit has been in some way repressed. So, is there room for, now the problem with there's not a problem, but with the spirit, you can start to access your multidimensional self and become liberated, which might be uncomfortable for people that are trying to be in the silence. So I just wanted you to riff on the idea of the alignment of mind, body, and spirit, and if those three need to be aligned, if that is the essential part of it, and why the spirit's not part of your, in the space.
Absolutely. I mean, I think language is a tricky thing, right? And so language, right, when we're articulating something in a very simple way, mind and body, right, is the first entry point that needs correction. And I don't really like to say fixed, but just correction. So as we go through and we remove the science of the yogic path is actually all about the spirit. We just tend not to use that word. What we use is being. So being and spirit are the same thing. And so we enter in on the most superficial level, which is the mind and the body. And because the mind and the body, through stress, is inhibiting us from connecting to, whether you want to call it spirit, being, or our essence, right? We have to activate and connect to our soul that's beyond all of that. And so from the entry point of when information is given out, it's given out more on that level to talk about mind and body, because that's where people's states of consciousness are. We only know mind and body. We don't know anything else. Everything else that's spoken about is on an abstract level. Now, that doesn't mean that Vedic meditation, it doesn't acknowledge spirit or being. The outcome and the result is the connection to being. And so everything about yoga, and when we take the word yoga, which is a Sanskrit word, that word means to yoke. It means to create unity, to create union. And when one goes into the yogic practices, whether it's asana or it's breath work, technically called pranayama, if it's kriyas, which is mantra with movement, if it's meditation using mantra to then go into silence, and in that state of being to connect to what you are referring to as spirit, and to activate the essence of the being through the soul, which in Sanskrit we would say the Atman. And so what we're really doing when we talk about yoga and we use the word yoga, which is highly misused in the West, yes, what we're saying is we're creating unity consciousness. So as we go into asana, as we go into meditation, what we're doing when the mind slips beyond thought and it connects to the stillness that sits within us, that's your being, that's your spirit, and that's your essence. And so as we teeter your vehicle, which is your body, which then has a mind, which then has thoughts, which is more of the superficial level of what we're all experiencing. So yoga is about going inward and connecting spirit to body, and creating the body, the vital organs that can perceive spirit that can perceive being through its brain and through its eyes. It's a science to really start to bring it as one, essentially. So Vedic meditation is definitely all about connecting to spirit. That's what the whole practice is about. We just don't really use that verbiage. When we talk about subtle body, that's the energetic body system, which is your spirit. And what's happening through the process is activating that energetic field, that spirit that sits silently within you, just waiting for you to acknowledge it and to bring attention to it. And not just attention, but to really activate it so that it moves through the body, like the wind moving through this earth.
Do you believe that I think that was really very well articulated in a verbal language. How did your guru that you travel with for 10 years help you develop because I think the other thing we're talking about is what people would refer to as aura, A-U-R-A. Because when I access my multidimensional self, and this is mainly in performance content, in entertainment. I don't know how to say this, but because I do sit, and oftentimes it's very therapeutic and in the stillness, but because it's in the abstract and there's no real quantifiable data. How did you become in touch with your spirit? And because just from the outside looking in, it seems that your aura, you have very bright aura. That's just something that comes across. There is a light to you. And so I wonder if that plays into it. Does your aura grow when you are able to tap into the subtle mind and access that spirit?
Absolutely. The way that my guru was taught and talking about lineage, so these masters, thousands of years old of knowledge that's been handed down. The basis of Vedic meditation or any yogic practices are really in the foundation of Vedanta, and Vedanta was based in two things. One, direct experience. Two, knowledge, wisdom. You have a hard time if you only have one, right? So if somebody's starting to awaken, and I see this a lot, right, because there's a lot of awakening happening in the world. It's the call of the time. And people will have these amazing experiences with, either you can call it your auric field or an energetic experience, or maybe they do some plant medicine and something awakens in their consciousness. And they have this direct experience, and then they walk away and they don't have the knowledge to understand. They're really bewildered by it. And so then I see this other side where you can have somebody be very scholarly, they can speak really well on knowledge, but yet they have no direct experience. So none of the language of things has really awakened. And they go together because words don't really give context to the direct experience.
Exactly.
It's like each word that's given is like a vortex. It starts to open on an energetic level as your consciousness starts to rise and expand. And from the Vedic perspective, we're awakening our Atman. So as we go inward, which sits at the heart, right? Our spiritual brain is sitting at the tip of our sternum, right? If we're talking about the biology of the body. And when we poke in there with our fingertips, it's a little tender, and it's in that space. And that's where our soul sits. But if we don't give attention to it by going inward, it won't start to activate. Now, the Atman is what carries the light that lives within us. And so you can see this, and thank you, so beautiful that you can see the radiance that comes from my practice of years of staying with it. But you can see it with starts to develop because you have a pathway that's connecting that inner radiance through the heart and through the mind, and it starts to radiate out of the body. You can literally physically see it through someone's skin.
Right.
I had a student in LA who said he's been meditating for about 10 months, and he's a fitness trainer, and he was laughing, and he said, Yashoda, I've had people coming up to me asking me if I've been getting facials lately because my skin is glowing. And of course he hasn't, but it's because he's been really diligent with his practice, and this inner radiance is starting to expand. And so for me, when I was able to live with my guru and to, travel the world with him for a decade, I lived and breathed the teachings. Every conversation that we had was the teaching of the science of being and the art of living. And at the same time, I was very diligent with showing up to my practice and my techniques. Everything my teacher gave me, I did, all the time invested. And, I'm a mother, and, I work, I do all these things, and I still would show up to it. So it was the context of having his knowledge, that wasn't just the knowledge of the tradition, of the lineage, of understanding how to connect being to the biology of the body, because it really is an ultimate supreme science that's very well verified. When you start doing it, when you start experiencing, then it starts to bring light to all of this knowledge. Or maybe books, if you read like Yogananda's book that he wrote, some people might say, oh, those experiences aren't real. But when you're someone who's doing the practices, yes, they are real, because they're happening to you too.
Talking to Yashoda, Devi Ma on the Jake Feinberg Show. I'm just so humbled to be able to engage with her. We have a game on this program called Name That Voice. I don't expect you to know who this is, but pay attention to the content, and then we'll come back and break it down.
My thing was this, like, I was not at a good place, like, I was not feeling good physically, and also too young to not be feeling good, and I recognize that. And so, when I got in there, basically what happened for me was my drug thing got handled, never ever went back to it after that. And then number two, I started getting into another portion of something that's a little different than Scientology, but it falls under that, which is Dianetics. I read the Dianetics book, which is just mindset. I just had to get myself a little straight. I had problems. I grew up, it was a fairly normal life for a kid, but I had issues. I had issues with lots of things, with music, racism, poverty, family stuff. Just normal stuff that a young black kid or African American kid would have if he's really someone that's going to really inspect his life and how he's growing up, And I got into Scientology, and that just took care of everything for me. And
can you explain how? Though? Can you explain how specifically? Because it is, people are dealing with addiction. This is why I love doing this with you on this show, because the artists, you guys are willing to talk about your fallibilities, but specifically, how did you get through it? Because it just didn't.
Well, okay. Let me put it this way. Like, lots of times, a person may have a lot of problems, but when you really look at them, they're specific and specific subjects, and sometimes it's difficult to deal with specific subjects that bother you as specifics, because usually by the time it gets you and it's weighing you down like you got a damn elephant on your shoulder, is usually when they all converge together and you just have this big pile of mud in your universe, and you can't figure out, God, what the hell is it? Like, I feel so bad. And then you may look at some things, well, God, I wondered if it's, my problems with my girlfriend. Oh, I wonder if it's this. I wonder if it's that. Maybe, am I playing good? Am I, so basically what happened, I was able to separate all these things. They're courses that help you do that. I took a great course in very simple course in Scientology that I still use today. It's just a communications course, and it just based.
Yashoda Ma, thank you so much for sitting through that. Are you hip to the band Return to Forever?
Unfortunately, I'm not.
It's okay. They're not a modern band. So this was an early '70s fusion group led by Chick Corea, who's a great piano player, and that dude we were listening to was the bassist Stanley Clark, who's amazing bass. And so he was talking about this plane that he was on. I mean, at 19, he was a virtuoso, upright bass player, and but was partying a lot and doing a lot of hard drugs, and then Chick Corea, who still is a Scientologist, brought him into this field, whatever it is, and it helped him. Well, like what he was saying there, it helped him, but he had to eventually break away because it became, for lack of a better word, like a cult. And so, Yashoda Ma, can you talk about your experiences in authentic? I mean, clearly you found your guru and you travel with him. I believe it's a him, right? It's he.
Yes, it is.
So that was your, that became the divine radiance. But before that, were you in less authentic yoga communities? And I guess more to the point, what is your advice to younger cats who are seekers, and not to get caught up with a more of a cult following and lean more? How to differentiate between a cult and then actually like authentic healing meditation, such as the Vedic meditation that you have?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting journey. As we go, you can call it self-help. As we start to move towards self-transformation and we move into maybe a spiritual community and those types of things, and anything, quite honestly. I mean, somebody could walk into, Vedic meditation and think that's a cult. It really has to do with when you're seeking. It's really, really important that you don't get lost in giving your power to one person, ever. And this can be universal. And I can see it I have two gurus, so I can see it in all my communities and see how people get really lost in idolizing somebody or thinking that their way is the only way. And you get lost in it. And that's okay. Sometimes that's part of the journey. But I really, really, the path is for you to awaken. The path is for you to surrender to you and to your highest self. It's nobody else outside of you. And so because we have a world that's really popularized in idolizing celebrities and the rich and the famous, or then we take that and we turn that into our spiritual quest that we have. The path is about you. The path is about you empowering yourself through the techniques and the guidance of somebody who's already done it before you, right? And it's important to stay connected to the truth of that as you move through. I think everybody goes through a hard time in the spiritual community. I did as well. And what you're really learning in the ultimate teaching is it's you. Everything is through you. You're not here to worship somebody else. You're not here to give all your money to somebody else. You're not here to follow somebody. You're here to gain guidance. You're here to understand knowledge. And whatever teacher is able to give you powerful techniques or readings or whatever it is to transform, then you can be devoted to the path itself. You can be grateful to the one who has done that and is able to turn around and provide that for you. But beyond that, I think there's a breaking point. It's like when you're ready, the teacher will show. And when you've transformed, the teacher will go the individual if they really start to get the path. With all due respect to lineage, with all due respect to teachers, to techniques. So it's really keeping that level mind and not giving your power fully to anybody, ever. You're here to empower yourself through it all.
When did this crystallize for you as far as not following some sort of figurehead or leader, and because I think that to truly engage, you said it's really, you keep saying it's your journey, it's on the individual, but there has to almost be your point of view has to be shifted, and I guess what I'm trying to say is there has to be some kind of trauma or getting to a point where you've hit the bottom of the pit, which is actually the best place to be, because there's nowhere to go but up. And I just wonder if you are where you are now, but can you talk about how you overcame adversity in your life and how it made you stronger and put you on the path that you're on today?
That's a few different questions. Ultimately, our challenges in life, or our darkest points, are the opening to healing the wound and coming into the light. For me, coming into the path, as a short story of life, I was an adoptee. I suffered from feeling disconnected from everyone. Having been raised in a family who adopted me, I always felt like the outsider looking in. It harnessed what became a really great tool through my path, which is the crown jewel of discrimination, being able to know what's truth and what's not, to really be able to perceive from a different level. But that suffering that I felt growing up, being adopted, the stories that I had in my mind of, not being wanted or just not connecting, caused a lot of depression that I recognized starting at 12, which then turned into suicidal thinking and trying to take my life. And that was an ongoing battle until I was about 25. And in that, I was always in wellness, and I was always spiritual, always seeking. I grew up Catholic, so I was always trying to find the happiness in that religion. I was always trying to understand.
Yeah, I did.
Like, who's the priest that's happy, and why can't they get married, and why can't they have relationships? Yeah. I didn't. Though it served its purpose, I couldn't find the happiness until I came to yoga. And as I started going through that path, I would teeter in and out of doing yoga classes, and I'd start to feel good, and then I'd fade out. And I did a lot of different, Landmark Forum and a lot of self-help books and different workshops and breathwork workshops and so on and so forth. And I really feel like my journey of that suffering that I had in that darkness, it gave me, and being an athlete, I was a really hardcore tomboy athlete growing up, and between the discipline of being an athlete and my journey of trying to discover the depth of life, really gave me the discipline to stay in structure. So once I found the Vedic meditation, I never left it. It gave such good results, and even when I had issues with my guru, even when I judged, certain things that, both my gurus do, what I found is that the journey we'll project whatever our stuff is onto our teachers. And once we start to awaken that we're projecting everything onto everybody, we start to take personal responsibility in our transformation. The greatest question of yoga is, who are you? And the answer is, you're the experiencer. And because you're the experiencer, what do you want to experience? Do I want to keep projecting onto my gurus? Do I always want to feel good? So I want to experience something different. And when my consciousness started to understand that, then I could start to navigate from a different way. And as I became a teacher, that was probably a pivotal turning point, or the pivotal turning point of my life. When you become the teacher, it's the ultimate practice. You know, you're not the authority. You're learning at a quantum level as you're teaching. Your students are your greatest gurus. They're your greatest reflections of what it is that you need to continue to work on. And so that journey is ever unfolding as consciousness starts to expand and really develop and really broaden. And that's the beauty of, as we talk about, if we want to call it spirit or being, which is consciousness itself, it mirrors the universe. It's always expanding. It's always growing. It's always evolving. And it's upon us to be able to be the perceiver of what that really is. And so I find it to be a journey, like, you know, mother and father. You know, when you're raised, you've got mommy and daddy, and they've got to give you boundaries, and they've got to give you some rules, and they've got to mold you into becoming a responsible adult, hopefully. And then if they're a good parent, they'll let you fly. They'll let you leave. They're not there to tell you what to do after that. And I see it the same as a spiritual community. The guru, in essence, is the spiritual mother or father. And, you know, they'll deal with the children, and they give them everything that they need to become responsible, empowered, abundant, creative, all of these things. And then you got to let them go. And you've got to let them fly. You've got to let them see how they're going to do. And I think when people can enter in that they're not latching on to something forever and ever and ever, that it's okay. You'll evolve in the way that you need to. You'll be in it for however long you need to. And there is a breaking point. That's just part of growing. You have to grow and evolve and go beyond. It's a lot of what I teach is what we call transcendence. And transcend means to go beyond limit. So there's a certain point where we have to transcend that.
Absolutely. I mean, this is where the rubber meets the road on the Jake Feinberg show. I mean, it strikes me, John McLaughlin is a phenomenal guitar player. I'm just going to read you this quote that he told me. He said, "I got to play for the Dalai Lama one time, and I got to meet him, and I got his blessings. He gave his talk afterwards, and the first thing he said was, 'People say my religion is Buddhism. Wrong. My religion is happiness.'" Mm-hmm. And growing up in a very conservative household of Catholicism, whatever it was for you, and it strikes me as you were always seeking questions, even though you're not really supposed to question in Catholicism. I don't think things are very set in their ways, and so you know, you were lonely and very alone, and then along the way, as you cultivated and became focused on your true nature or your habitual nature, which was at the time kind of floating in and out of classes and breathing classes, and then truly overcoming your habitual nature and finding your true nature as a teacher through your gurus and through your own transcendence, happiness has come over you. Not all the time, nobody's happy all the time, but that is where your aura is. It is exuding light, and that is your happiness. And I wonder if you believe that, looking back on it, that's kind of what the Dalai Lama was telling McLaughlin, is that, or the group, was that it's Buddhism is a practice, but my religion is happiness. And I wanted to get your take on that.
I couldn't agree with it more. You know, all of these things, I think, you know, because there's such consciousness in the world of separation and wanting to put everything in a box and label it, any great master, it doesn't matter if they're Sufi or they're Buddhist or they're Vedic or they're from Kabbalah, when they really start to understand the essence and they've connected to their essence, it's that our entire states of consciousness, they never connect to any religion at all in any sort of way. It's the technique, it's the scriptures, it's the writings that are there to awaken you to what our deepest essence is. Every single one of us on a spirit level, on the being level, we are bliss consciousness, which is the experience of love. It's beyond words. It's beyond thought. It's beyond separation. And in this place is happiness. It's this baseline of happiness that absolutely becomes unshakable with grace. And I can truly say at this point in life, through my practice and through the technique of what I've shown up to, that it doesn't matter what the circumstances are in life, and I absolutely get challenged. I absolutely have stress. I mean, there's environmental stresses that I have no control over, but the baseline of my happiness, there's nobody that can take that away from me. No one. And every day I'm in awe of it. Every day I'm in awe of it and in gratitude that I showed up to create that unshakable grace, that you could take everything away from me and I'm fine. I'll adapt. I'll figure it out. I might have a few moments of complaint, but I will adapt very quickly to what is. And that's really the grace that's being taught through all of this. I always tell the story about the Dalai Lama that nobody actually really talks about, and I tell this to my newer students often. I said there's one thing that this man is famous for, and he's famous for compassion, right? He's famous for this deep compassion. Long ago, when he was born to become the Dalai Lama. His whole life was primed to be the Dalai Lama. This is what he was told. This is what his life was cultivated as. And then there hit a certain point where his country denied him. They not only denied him and kicked him out of his country, but they said he's not the Dalai Lama. They completely called him a fraud, right? But never in the headlines in life do we ever see that the Dalai Lama had a nervous breakdown, or that he was upset, or that he gave up. He didn't. He just moved. I mean, the man got kicked out of his country. No one ever talks about that because he never made a big deal out of it. He moved. He continued to be the Dalai Lama. He continued to be unshakable in grace. He never ever let that get him down. That never stopped him in what he was here to be. And I think that's profound. I think that goes back to his religion is happiness, and it doesn't matter who or what circumstances in life want to take that away from him. They can't. He's already established in it. And I think that's what every technique is really here to do. Every religion, if we talk about Catholicism, Jesus spoke of, the heaven is within, right? He would talk about that constantly. He was promoting unconditional love. The word Catholic means universal. He was speaking the same language as the yogis of creating unity consciousness. And if you look at the cross and Jesus on it, he's got his heart ripped open, and the cross is a symbol of the human energetic body, and the body itself, when we stand up, we're a cross. And what he was talking about was opening the vessel of the heart to live unconditional, to live as the universal being that we all are. And so, for the Dalai Lama to sit there and say that his religion is happiness, that's something I hope that the world evolves into, instead of separating and fighting about religion and who they think God is, because quite honestly, we're all God, and that's what everything teaches.
Well, worst case scenario, maybe you could try out for, if you're a great athlete, maybe you could play women's basketball if everything falls apart or something. I don't know what your sports. We have another voice to play for you. You're not going to know who it is, but just pay attention to the content. We'll come back.
This is so hard to say so publicly, and yet I'm so compelled because this is for every single woman, every daughter, every man, every person who wants to have a child in this world and feels like that's possible, that it can be done in the most sacred, beautiful way. And the way that I did it was at home. And I really want to empower women to, first and foremost, visualize and think about the type of birth that they would want to have before they allow the institution of birth to tell them what childbirth looks like. And I think we need to think about this also for families. As couples come together and bring new life into the world, how is that experience going to impact the type of relationships they have from that point forward? I'm very much about awareness from conception and from the beginning of life and how that can play out. Living life is not easy every day. We're challenged, but the more that we choose to be as conscious and present as we can, so much comes out of that. And having my children at home and doing certain things in our family's life to create ritual outside of just a regular routine and, habitual mechanical life, you restore the possibilities of how we do create community and protect what's sacred. And then you can start creating the type of community and environment that supports that. Because when you take time to nurture life, it puts you in a different awareness. And it doesn't mean you have to give birth to a child or you have to raise a baby, but taking care of life, it could be a garden, it could be an animal, it could be something you do for Earth. When you take on that responsibility, I think it deepens our compassion and our empathy of how we need and want to live with others. So that type of work, having children at home and in taking responsibility for my own health and for my family's well-being, just puts us in a different space of empowerment.
Yashoda, thank you for sitting through that. That was an interview I did with a woman named Sade Inwai, who's an entrepreneurial businesswoman in Oakland, California. And, I know fundamentally my daughters, they changed me. I mean, parenthood changes everybody in some way. My kids, for lack of a better word, broke open my skull in the sense that there was some sort of descarga or release of something that some sort of self-concept for me or thing that I wasn't think I was capable of doing was being partially responsible for creating such beautiful human beings, and they allowed me to dream again, and I almost became. It was like a rebirth is not really the greatest word, and that was when my daughters were born. I also received the Tao, and that fundamentally I became a Tao cultivator, which I still am today, which allows me to tap into my true nature. But she was, as an African-American woman in Oakland, and she's talking about the practice of birth and the Western methodology of the cold, sterile hospital, and especially being a minority, where people were saying, hey, you need to go to the hospital to birth your children. And she was just very forthright and recognizing that I want to birth my children at home, and I recognize that from a spiritual level and from the deepest level at all, it will have an impact on the sanctity of my family moving forward. And I thought it was quite profound, and I wanted to talk to you about your experience birthing your child.
Well, thank you for sharing that part of the interview. She was very powerful, and I couldn't agree more with her. Birth is I find, as any parent, but obviously I'm talking about a mother who's carried a child, to me it's the deepest initiation and practice of all time. For me, it was, I'm very much a black sheep in my family. And, when I became pregnant and having my child, I was very adamant that I was going to have a water birth. I wanted my child to be birthed in the water because I knew that it was the most soothing experience for a human being to be born from water to water. At the time when I gave birth to my child, he's getting close to 11, I guess, 2009, there weren't a lot of birthing facilities in America. And as a first-time mom, even though my partner at the time, this was not his first child, so he had a lot more experience, but not as laboring. He was very supportive.
Sort of.
Yeah, he was very supportive of my path and what I was choosing.
Yeah.
But at the time, I found fear of the idea of doing it at home because I just didn't understand. And so I was trying to find a facility in America and wasn't really having a successful job finding that. There was plenty of midwives that I quite liked. At the time I was living in Flagstaff, Arizona, and the midwives that I loved lived in Los Angeles. So it was a little daunting to be like, are we going to rent a house just and have the baby so that I could have it with, a particular midwife but without a center? And we even looked into Australia and having it done in Australia because Australia is much more progressive in, home births and facilities and water births, and they're much more ahead of the time. And, my experience was in the very beginning, I just knew my path. And I was very strong in my path. I had one ultrasound in the beginning. I started off going to India, and I was in India. I was with my Ayurvedic doctor who pretty much predicted everything from the sex of my child to the strength of my child to the strength of my body and my mind. So I went through a treatment called Panchakarma, which most people can't even believe I did that when I was pregnant.
What does that look like? What is that?
Panchakarma it comes from Ayurveda, and you go into a facility and you go through a lot of different treatments that balance the mind and the body itself, and then they give herbal remedies that bring in balance to help the body adapt and create basically wellness and health. And so I had done those treatments for about a week when I was in India and had the great good fortune of going into the Ganga, and it felt very blessed for my child. When I came back, I went to a physician and did the ultrasound. It was the only ultrasound that I did in my path. I did not want to interfere with the brain waves of my child. I didn't want to go to the doctor every week. When I sat with the physician, my partner at the time said, he's very adamant about certain things and blah, blah, blah. And when I sat down with him, I kind of took more of that role. Instead of him putting fear on me, I just said, I'm only here to, do the ultrasound, make sure that the baby's good. And from this point, you are an alternative. I'll be doing, a home birth.
I knew
I'll be doing
I just knew.
water.
I knew that this was what this is unbelievable. You're an alternative. This is really brave, though. I mean, although I find that so many powerful people who have found their voice or their niche, it's the same story. It's ownership of that child,
Absolutely.
And it just, Sade, I mean, it's hard for me to get my head around the fact that, child death at child, at birth is just higher in minority communities, at lesser facilities, at poorer hospitals. But there's like a stick-to-itiveness and a need for, I don't know what the right word is. It just comfortability. I mean, your child was a water baby. I mean, he came out in the water.
Yeah, I mean, and I think, in retrospect, and having had so many friends have babies after my past, and for me to be very out of the box. I mean, I didn't go to the doctor majority of the time. I hired my midwife 6 weeks, empowering primal experience of my life, and to be at home and be the lioness that could walk around naked, yelling and doing whatever I needed.
That's perfect.
It was empowering. I would never have wanted to be in a hospital. I never would. It never made sense to even lie down on your back. I mean, in pregnancy, we don't lie down on our back, so why would we birth a child on our back? A squatting position is the most comfortable position for a woman to have a baby, and I did mine all natural. I didn't take any drugs. So when I was in the water, it allowed for everything to open and push through, and my path of the yoga and the meditation really took over. I went into a transcendent space. I went into what I would call Shakti, my deepest, infinite organizing power. My divine feminine really took over. I didn't have anyone for the last 5 hours of my labor. Everyone was sleeping. I did it all myself.
Oh my
until
gosh!
The last,
You're like, just go to bed. I'll take care of it myself.
Yeah, I mean, I went into
That's
the zone. I mean,
wow.
As an athlete, you go into the zone, and there was this power voice that guided me, and I moved through it all. And then when it came to the last half an hour, once he started crowning, then my midwife was there and coaching, and everyone was awake and ready to bring him into the world at the dawn, basically. But I can say all of this and say I definitely believe that women need to be empowered. I mean, it was the late 1970s where drugs started getting put into labor. Prior to that, women didn't do that. Women much more were into their past. At least in that sense. I find nowadays a lot of doctors pressure women into C-sections, and I feel like it's because they just want them scheduled in, and it makes their life easier. And I think it's a shame. But on the contrast, when you become a mother, the minute that you become pregnant, and obviously I can't speak for the man because your guys' journey is totally different, but when you have another human being living on the inside of you, what you want as the woman doesn't always happen, because now you're become two.
Right.
And now you take on the karma and the purpose of this being that you're creating. So even though I could sit here and say this was my birth story, it was not my birth story. It was my son's. So it was whatever he needed to experience. So I'm lucky that that's what he wanted for his experience to be. It could have gone a different way. Maybe his experience would have ended up in the hospital or ended up in a different way. And so when I watch women who might have the greatest, they want to do it all natural, they want to do it at home, and then it ends up kind of being traumatizing, or it ends up being at the hospital, that really has to do with the combination of her and the child. It's the child's entry point. It's the beginning of their story. What is the child? What is, from the Vedic perspective, there's karma. There's karma and there's dharma. What is the karma of their birth? And so as the mother really starts to learn, we're here to surrender to what it is that we're guiding for them to unfold. To me, it's the beginning point of motherhood. So there's, I can't always say when women come to me, I say it's nice that you can have a plan, but know that that plan can go out the door.
Just the script can go right out the window. I mean, so many cats try to birth at home with a doula, and then all of a sudden it's like, they're not contracting, or then they're like, well, this, legally we have to go to the hospital. So then whatever idyllic plan you had just went up,
Yeah. And sometimes it's out of our hands. I mean, for me, mine was different. I had a 30-hour labor. It was not
Are you
easy.
kidding me?
And
All right, that is insane. No, because I mean, is that even like? Because I mean, is that at a certain point if you had a? I mean, I know everybody passed out and Yashoda just continued to rock on, but I mean, it's like, did you? I mean, did some people were like, this is not? I mean, did they try to put that insecurity into your head about, we really should go to some more safer place, and you just were like, no, I'm very content where I'm at. I mean, that's a long time to be in labor.
Like the strongest willpower, and I was processing whatever I needed to process to become a mother.
Yes.
But my midwife at that legal time that she, had to be like, hey, this is on me.
Yes.
We need to think about going to a hospital. They had that conversation away from me. I was upstairs in a bathtub at that time, regulating the temperature of my son and myself and going through my own stuff. And so they didn't come to me, thank God, because honestly, at that point, I probably would have said, oh, F it, let's just do this, get this baby out of me. But they didn't. My partner,
wow.
He knew me, and he told my midwife, he goes, I understand your responsibility. No, she's not going to the hospital. I know her, and I know she's going to pull through this, and I know she can do this here. And so they never came to me. He made the decision for me, and I'm so grateful that he knew me well enough to not bother me and to let me stay in my empowered state and let me work through what I needed to work through. There was some karma. There was some stuff I needed to work through, and that was my journey. And they honored it. They absolutely honored it, and they knew who I was, that I'd come out with a strong will, however long it took.
Well, I appreciate you extrapolating on that. Have you witnessed phenomena on your journeys? I mean, I've done interviews with Krishna Das and Dr. Larry Brilliant and people that were very close to Ram Dass. And, when he went to India to visit Maharaji, he gave him 4 pills of LSD that would put, Jake Feinberg on the moon, or most people would just on the moon, and it didn't. And Ram Dass spent the entire day with Maharaji, and Maharaji's temperament, metabolic, everything did not change. Nothing changed. And before that, Ram Dass had been doing these experiments at Boston University, my alma mater, well before I was ever born, but in the 60s about, this god drug of LSD and giving sort of this placebo cocktail to some cats that was a little bit more of a dirty cocktail than versus the pure LSD. And everybody came back from those trips and said, yeah, I touched God. The ones that had the cocktail didn't experience anything enlightening. The point is that when he got to India and he recognized that Maharaji did not change in his disposition, in his divine radiance, and in his peace, he realized that this person I'm going to botch the term, but it was something so far beyond this drug. And that's when Ram Dass realized that he could access that transcendent nature that we've been riffing on without drug, without LSD. There have been people that have gone to Africa and, picked up a dead chicken in the road and some medicine man brought it back to life. There's this phenomena that goes on, especially in these bastions of ancient wisdom that are no longer necessarily viable for Western people to travel to sometimes, which is painful. But I wonder about if you could share with us some phenomena that you may or may not have witnessed on your journeys. In music, for instance, there's only 2 letters that separate magic and music, and you can leave your physical body playing, and you can also leave your physical body as a member of the audience, and ultimately collective consciousness is raised. And I was wondering if you had any of those experiences along the way on your travels.
Through myself or through observing others?
I say more to the point of like absolute, you can't really explain what you saw. Like, let me be very clear. Let me just be very honest. I mean, we talk about you had suicidal thoughts, but I mean, to the point where if you did attempt to take your own life, the universe would not allow it to happen. You didn't know how you actually pulled through. You witnessed something that was unexplainable. It was magical. This stuff is very real. In my own journeys, it's happened as well. Not on, the most intense levels all the time, but you recognize that phenomena does exist, and the more that you tap into your true nature and continue to cultivate that, the more likely it is that you will be witnessing a lot of phenomena.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, I haven't had experiences of watching, my gurus, don't, their magic is through the subtle of their creation, through their thought processes. I can watch my guru as, I remember going to a party and sitting with him, and we'd have a conversation, and this person in particular was a litigator and a lawyer, and I know, my guru is very well educated, but in a nonlinear way. And I would watch him in those moments, and all of a sudden he would know everything about litigation. He would know the language, the vocabulary. It was as if he'd studied to become a litigator, and he would have this fantastic, amazing, engaging conversation. And I would sit there and observe, and then he'd turn and we'd go to another person, and he'd be talking to them, and maybe that person was, had a degree and a background in forestry. And all of a sudden, he would know everything about forestry. He would absolutely be able to speak that language and engage with them in such a beautiful way, and totally different vocabulary. And I watched him do this, over and over with different people with different states of consciousness. And as I later went into the practices and I started to understand the techniques and how clear one's mind becomes, and there's certain skill sets or natural abilities that then get enhanced to then super. And these are the things that I watched. I could watch my gurus, morph into their physiology. Literally, one of my gurus, it was hard to depict if he looked like Shiva or he was himself.
Wow.
He could morph in and out of what that being would look like. And there was moments where all of us in the class would go, oh, did you see that? Did you see what's happening? Right? Because consciousness, the body's, it's on an energetic level.
Yeah.
So whatever consciousness becomes will perceive. I also saw, I always get his name incorrect, this Buddhist monk, what is his name? Nick Nan Han. I saw him at a lecture, and he's probably the most radiant human being I've ever seen in my life, the most simple, well-established, enlightened human. He answered every question on the most simplest, precise level, but he was so radiant. He took up the entire stage with his radiance. And I just remember my friend looking over, and this was very much in the beginning of our path, so we didn't know anything. And my friend said, oh my God, he's glowing. Can you see that he's glowing? And I said, yeah, he's like taking up the entire stage. You couldn't even see anyone else because his auric field was at least 20 to 30 feet wide.
Wow.
And this was somebody who,
Whoa.
I wasn't even well trained at that point, and I was just like, "Whoa, this guy's amazing." I've been around. I have a very dear friend who's a pundit, and his consciousness is it's just God consciousness. This guy, he's the happiest human being. Never do I ever see him in anything else but the state of just total bliss. He's just the next level. He doesn't talk badly about anybody. He shows up in the state of grace, and anybody who's in his vibration just feels bliss. All you want to do is laugh and giggle. He's very wise, very innocent, very not like anyone you'll ever come across. And these special occurrences happen. But, you know, from my own experience, there are some deep tantric practices that I've done that are breath work and mantra. And the experiences that I've had of God just from doing breath work and particular mantras, the entire unified field activated to reveal the field up to the practices. It's profound. It's profound, and it's hard to even articulate through words what can be revealed and what can be experienced and felt through the body. It can be tactile, visual, and auditory.
Would you bless this listening audience by singing a mantra of your choice right now?
Let me sit with this. Om Bhurabhuva Swaha Tatsavitu Varenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yona Prachodaya.
Yashoda Ma, we've already been going here for 73 minutes, and there actually is, I haven't gotten to some stuff that I still wanted to talk to you about. And do you think we could do part 2 next week if you're available?
Sure. I'll look into my schedule, and if it's not next week, I know definitely the following week I can definitely do it.
Yeah, no, that's fine. It's I'm so humbled to know you, and thank you for educating people today. Obviously, we live in a very verbal society, and you're very articulate, but you don't live in an ivory tower, and I just know that, you know, in this time, all we can do is affect positive change in our world, and people will listen to this interview years from now when we're hobbling around and doing our thing, and or even after we've left this planet, and those seeds of cultivation will start for a whole new generation of human beings who are seekers. And so, and bless you, my friend. You are one of my teachers.
Thank you. Thank you. Such an honor, and so beautiful what you're bringing, and allowing for myself and others to have the opportunity to speak or from our heart, from truth.
Bless you, my friend. Continue on your day. We'll be in touch for part 2.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Yashoda Devi Ma, another divine feminine spirit on the Jake Feinberg Show. That's it for now. We'll be back tomorrow. Until then, peace.